Hey everyone, today I want to talk about some more composite chart aspects. I want to focus on the sun square or opposite Pluto in a composite chart. These aspects are pretty famous for creating a lot of challenges in a relationship. I've definitely seen it in long-term relationships. I do think that these aspects create a lot of difficulty, and that difficulty is part of what almost defines the relationship. But it's not always healthy. Actually, most often than not, these aspects show up in composite charts of relationships that aren't healthy. So let's talk about why that might be. The sun in a composite chart represents the relationship's identity, that sense of unity with a person. It's also like the relationship's vitality, the life force of the relationship. And Pluto in a composite chart represents struggles, power, how we deal with our own fears and transformation within a relationship, the debt that you accumulate or fears that come out in a relationship, the psyche of the relationship. So the main commonality between the square and the opposition is that there are struggles for power and control. They show up differently between the square and the opposition. So I'll talk about the square first. With the square, the identity of the relationship feels like it's hard to establish. It feels like we can't ever form a unit, like a solid partnership. Sometimes couples can be together, but feel like they're not fully together. I mean, they can be married, but still feel like there's a separateness within their relationship. They can't fully identify as a solid unit. Now, other aspects can offer this support or this cohesion in other ways. The square on its own, though, and especially if you add other aspects that indicate some amount of separateness or inconsistency, then this will be a bigger theme. And the separateness can show up as actual physical separation. So maybe we live separately, or being together long term, like years and years and years, but never getting married, or having completely separate interests or hobbies or even social groups, or, having important life events occur that we partake in separately. Like we're never fully immersed in each other's lives and in each other's worlds, or even not being involved in each other's passions. That's just something that I've noticed. And I don't know if it's just limited to the sun square Pluto. Again, like I said, if you add more layers to this, like Moon Uranus hard aspects or Sun Uranus hard aspects, or if you add more like Saturn stuff, like if the Sun or Venus, Mars, Mercury are also making hard aspects to Saturn, that's like the type of theme that just adds to the separateness. Now, if it's not a physical separation, it's more of like an energetic separation. And the reason for this desire to be sort of distant or separate from one another is because of power issues, control issues, and both of those stemming from their underlying fears of really letting someone into their world. I've seen the square show up more as one person displaying more of the desire to control the other person. But both people can do this. This can go back and forth. It's not always just one person. I've seen it as one person being the more dominant one and demanding more change. They're trying to force the other person to change and become what they want them to become. But these are very high demands. We're not just asking each other to change habits or maybe make some minor adjustments. No. And with this square, they want the other person to change their personhood, their identity. They want them to be a different person. But this is stemming from their fear of not being in control, their fear of the unknown, their fear of being with somebody and having the relationship blow up in front of them. Achieving that sense of identity within the relationship is challenging, which makes the relationship feel insecure. It doesn't ever truly feel stable. It can feel stable in other ways, like I said, which we would hope that there would be other very good aspects, like the moon should be happy, should be very, very happy if you have this aspect in your chart, because that sense of identity can feel kind of rocky and unstable. So that's why they want each other to change, to be something different. They want to have control over the other person so they can achieve that sense of security within the relationship. They can feel more secure if the person is who they want them to be, so that they don't get into something where it's too unknown. They don't know where it's going. But power struggles begin because the other person doesn't just give in to the other person's demands, usually. And it's not like there shouldn't be changes, right? Relationships are a give and take. But with an aspect like this, we feel so easily threatened by each other. And we both are so set on having our way, having what we can control. And it feels like if we give in to the other person's demands or even requests, it feels like we're almost sacrificing ourselves and we're giving up who we are, like we're giving too much of ourselves. This aspect can feel like it's draining the life force out of you. Like you're having to give a lot of yourself to feel comfortable in this relationship and to make the other person feel comfortable in the relationship. And there's also that fear that comes out of being controlled, which is what's happening. There is a back and forth dynamic of the people trying to control one another. Those fears are also influencing their perception of it. They don't approach this through a healthy give and take, healthy compromises, healthy sacrifices. It's all stemming from fears. And then the way that we remain fixated in our position and the way that we don't give in is also rooted in our fears. That's why there can be so much conflict with this aspect. And it can be exhausting because we don't just give in to each other without a fight. The one that is making the more overt demands for change is also avoiding their own fear of change, because they're not taking, both people usually, but especially the one that makes the more overt demands, is not taking responsibility for their role in this unhealthy power struggle. They also fear losing themselves, so they avoid looking at themselves and would rather focus on how the other person needs to change, how the other person needs to do this, because they will also fear sacrificing themselves for the relationship. We can't fully give into this relationship because we feel like we're going to be giving up ourselves, our personhood. And that's why it can create that separateness. It can be a very selfish and potentially damaging relationship to both people, and they both have to take responsibility for the ways in which they are not willing to change and not willing to take responsibility or accountability for their part in this unhealthy dynamic, because it's their fear of being controlled that is coming out as them then being controlling, if that makes sense. Like they fear being controlled by the other person, so then the way that they're protecting themselves from each other is controlling the other person. But then they just don't ever really let each other be fully in and involved in their worlds. And to kind of resolve this conflict is they both have to be very willing to look at themselves. And as soon as you notice that you're going to point the finger at the other person, you have to look at yourself. And this is going to be like a constant thing. They always have to be aware of this because they are so easily threatened, almost always on the defense with each other. It's hard to walk away from this one. It's almost like the fighting sometimes even keeps them together because they're never going to fully give into this relationship. And in some ways that almost feels safer. It can feel safer to be in a relationship where we are sort of separate than to really have true intimacy. And again, like I said, you can have that in this relationship as well. And you would hope that you do. You really have to think, what are the ways that I need to change? What are the ways that I'm expecting my partner to change that maybe I'm not even willing to do myself? So that's the square. Now I'm going to talk about the opposition. So the opposition is very similar to the squares, but The opposition is a little bit worse, at least in the sense of the more overt conflict. The opposition is more obvious that it's occurring. It usually shows up in relationships where they fight a lot more and there's a lot more arguments, even public fighting. Like, they are not afraid to get into these conflicts with each other in public. I think the opposition can show also more physical or even verbal abuse. You can definitely see that with the square, but I think it's more common to see it in the opposition, where the square sometimes shows one person wanting to control the other person. I think the opposition is usually both people doing this. The square is also both people, but it's usually one person that's more overt about it. With the opposition, both people are pretty overt about wanting to control and change the other person. They're more direct about their demands for the other person to change, and it's a bigger influence in the sense that both people can feel like they're almost pushed to their limit. They push each other so far in their desire or attempt to control each other, and the other person that's on the receiving end of this controlling behavior feels like they are also pushed to their limit of how much they can tolerate, and they are pushed to the limit of how much they push back. It can be a very unhealthy dynamic with the opposition as well, because both people demand change from each other. It's like they want to influence the other person to change, but that influence isn't received well, and so they react and respond very badly to each other, and very angrily, even aggressively sometimes, or just unhealthily to each other. And both people are very stubborn. Usually this kind of brings out the worst qualities in us, and very unwilling to change for the other person, because again, it's the same kind of fear. Like, if I do, I'm giving of myself, but it just feels more intense with this aspect because it's more apparent. It's more apparent that you guys are kind of on opposing teams. We're not really acting like teammates and pulling this out of each other. This need for control, this need for power, we're pulling that out in each other in more extreme ways. And then we're responding to each other from that in more extreme ways. So that's why you tend to see this one have more of like the violence, or more of like the verbal, physical altercations, which again, you can see with the square, but the opposition is a little bit more famous for it. And the fighting, while it is exhausting for both people, it can weirdly be something that they identify as part of their relationship. Like, it can almost be something like with the square that keeps them together, but with the opposition, they kind of normalize it, even though it's not healthy. It's not a sign of a functional relationship. They're always on the defense as well, but with the square, sometimes you see a theme of them walking on eggshells with each other. The opposition, they don't usually walk on eggshells with each other. They are a lot more upfront with each other about their demands, their expectations. They push back harder with each other, which is why you tend to see this one in couples who like argue in public, because they don't usually hold back with each other. This kind of brings out like the fighter in everybody when you have this opposition in your composite chart. That's how it's different from the square, is it's just the same theme, but just more intense. There's a bigger responses, the conflict escalates more quickly, the fighting can even be more frequent with the opposition, and they really don't hold back. We're very upfront with our feelings and what we want, but that is what leads to that conflict, is because we're not responding to each other well. So we really, with the opposition, we really want to try to regulate ourselves, because we automatically see the other person as a threat. We don't really give our partner or whoever we're in this relationship with, we don't really give them an opportunity to be anything other than a threat to our sense of self, to our personhood, to our energy, to our identity and vitality. We're so protective of that. But this opposition can create a kind of shell around the couple where that's all they're doing in that shell, is just fighting and pushing back and fighting and pushing back, and they don't really allow themselves to kind of get some air from that, you know? So they really have to try to regulate and really try to give each other the chance to not be a villain, right? Because their perception of each other as the villain kind of triggers this as well. So that's the opposition. Like I said, with the square, it's the same with the opposition. You want other softer, very soft aspects with this, because this one can bring out a lot of aggression in people. It's just important to look at what else could balance this out in a more supportive way. So I hope that you found this video helpful. Let me know what your experiences have been with the square and opposition and composite charts, if you've ever had relationships with these aspects in them. And I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.